What's up there, everybody? It's Carpo. Now, I want to make this a reasonably length video, but not sure if that'll be possible. I'd like to talk for a minute about drugs and addiction and my story with substance use. Before I made this video, I kind of thought to myself, could I consider myself an expert on addiction? How arrogant. And I thought, no, we're all experts on addiction. And that still sounds arrogant, but I should explain my point. Those of us who have had addictions in our lives and overcome them have seen the faults in our ways, and my experience has shown me that the mind can fool you into thinking that you're doing okay when you're not doing okay. And that's one of the justifications that we have for use, when people say, I'm doing fine, and they don't even realize they're not doing fine. But as far as considering ourselves users experts on addiction, my experience, I was sent to treatment because I was busted for having cannabis back in 98, 97. And at that time, I was sent to a treatment facility because I had a dirty drug test for cannabis. And I was the only one in this class that was there for cannabis. Everyone else had meth, cocaine, alcohol addictions. And we kind of laughed about that. But the two people who ran the thing were complete morons. Neither one of them had ever had an addiction to drugs, but the minute there was a break, they'd run right outside to smoke as many cigarettes as they could. That showed me that... sorry, I thought I saw somebody coming up. That showed me that you know, we're putting people into these positions that have never had these experiences and therefore really have no basis in, you know, trying to tell others that they're addicted or not addicted to something. But we get too wrapped up in the terms of addiction. First off, is it an addiction or is it a compulsion? Or is it a tool? And that's one of the most difficult aspects. Mainly I'm going to be talking about cannabis and kratom in this video for the sake, because I have the most experience with those. But when I was 15 or so, I tried psychedelics for my first time. And since then, I've had a vast amount of experiences on these substances. There are still people out there who consider them just party drugs and just will never understand. Well, when I was 15, I also tried cannabis, and I've been a daily cannabis user since I was 15. Have I taken breaks? Yes, a few times, and a couple times, once for over 2 years. Now, this is where I can only speak from my own experience. Now, I've been tapering on kratom, which is kind of my inspiration for making this video. I've been a daily kratom user since 2009, so next year it'll be 10 years, okay? And I'm going to show myself and the world by documenting this that because I have a camera here and I'll just do a daily kind of report thing. I've been through so many addictions and understand my mind so well that I know that I have to fill my time with other things. If I'm going to quit using, let's say, a harder drug, or for example, if I were using cocaine or methamphetamine, you tend to end up with a group of people that do that, and if you quit, you have to not only find new friend groups, but you have to find new things to do with your time to occupy your mind. When it comes to kratom, kratom isn't something I do just to get high and get away from anything. I do it to function, so therefore it's not a matter of quitting and then finding something else to do with my kratom time. It would just be doing my normal routine. And this is one of the things that I'd like to explain, because kratom has a bad image in society because of the fact that it's linked to opioids. And I have no doubt that many people who have quit kratom have had issues with it. And that's why I wanted to compare it to the cannabis issue. A while back, about a month ago, I left a comment on a video. I believe it was your mate Tom. He's a guy who, I guess, got clean and sober. He made a video. He said, how I overcame my serious weed addiction. And I didn't even really realize it was his at the time. I was just listening to it, and he was talking about how hard it was, you know, and I was reading the comments, and there were people talking about having, you know, sweats and delirium, because I left a comment that said, I quit cannabis for 2 years cold turkey, and all I got was a case of boredom for a bit, which was true. For a couple of days I just felt like, what to do? You know, like, it was not really anything different that I was doing. I realized it was all in my head, and I was like, well, went on with my life. If you smoke cannabis all the time, you might, sure, it might be a little harder to get to sleep at night. You're not going to just pass out. But the point being that my experience wasn't much. Some of the comments people made to that, they said, well, it may not be for you, but, I couldn't sleep for weeks and I'm still sweating. And the one guy says, I have a chest cold, and on top of that, I'm sweating from, not having cannabis. And I was like, well, how do you know it's not just the cold? And this is the problem. All we have is anecdotal evidence. But there are definitely people who are going to respond differently to cannabis use depending on how much they smoked and how often. And that's one of the interesting things. As a daily smoker, for as long as I've smoked, there were times when I'd smoke all day long. And lately, in the last year or so, I've just somewhat lost interest in it. I still smoke in the evenings, but not a whole lot, nothing like I used to. And I get the same benefits from it. Now, kratom is the same way. You can abuse it, you can continually take it, but once you reduce your dose down to a manageable level, you find that, you can get the same effects. Now, as a user of kratom for 10 years, I still only take about 5 grams at a time, sometimes even less, and maybe 2 to 3 times a day. So it's not very much. Some people I talk to take 40, 50, 80 grams a day. There's a point of diminishing returns on everything. And this is why no matter what substance we consume, there can be a level where it's beneficial. But also, one of the biggest issues is that all substances get lumped together. So a person who's taking kratom who says, I'm doing just fine, people will say, well, that's what your mind is telling you. Just because cocaine operates that way doesn't mean that kratom operates that way. One of the interesting things is that we consider it polysubstance abuse if a person uses more than one thing, rather than saying, well, this person uses a couple of different substances to help them. We say, oh, well, they're a multi-abuser and we need to fix that problem. And I've met enough addicts to know that, yes, some people can't control themselves, but it's really hard when everybody gets lumped together and the plant or the drug itself gets demonized. So we've been through this since the days of the cannabis when it was demonized, but now we're legalizing it. Psychedelics, we were always told you jump off of bridges and go crazy if you tried acid, but now they're legalizing psilocybin for PTSD purposes and whatnot. We're finally growing up and realizing it's not about the drugs. You can't ban something because a few people abuse it. But I noticed that there's 4 main reasons, this is what I came up with, why people will quit a drug, or what I consider a damaging addiction or a reason to quit a drug. The first one's mental, and that's if it's harming you mentally or causing you mental anguish or stress or anxiety or depression, whatever it might be, or you're going schizophrenic, then yes, that's a problem, and we should probably quit using the substance. There's mental, there's physical, and that's obvious. If you're drinking a lot and it's harming your body, no matter how much you function in life, you're not a functioning alcoholic if you're damaging your body. So, number 3 would be financial. And sometimes even when people are able to consume in moderation or and not having any physical or mental problems, they might have the financial problem of not being able to afford it. And that would be a big one for some people. That's not so much of an issue, but I know people who feel really guilty spending money on their medications even, or on their kratom, that they need for their pain. And others just make them feel bad about it, but we already make ourselves feel bad enough if we can't afford something. Those are the 3 main ones, mental, physical, and financial, that I've found. But there's a 4th one, and that's social. Social pressure by our friends and family, the people around us, our counselors, everybody telling us, you shouldn't do this because that's not good for you. Even when in your heart you know, well, I'm just taking a teaspoon of kratom, it's helping me motivate and do all these things. I haven't had any adverse effects. And that's one of the things, after 10 years, I've never had adverse effects. I don't have stomach problems, I don't have any jaundice when people claim you're going to turn yellow if you take kratom too long. These are the same horror stories that we heard from anything else. Perhaps some people have had liver damage. Do I know why or what it was on it or what they were taking? No, I don't. But I think that it's a matter of moderation and common sense. Sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes drugs are harmful long term. But look at all the things they told us about cannabis that turned out not to be true. I mean, not only is it not found to be very harmful, but it's found to be beneficial. And many plants turn out to be the same way, and kratom's no exception. It's going to have benefits beyond, just people taking it recreationally, because very few people do. Most people who take it for a reason, because you don't really get high. And sure, people will argue, oh, I get high on kratom. Sure, the first few times you get lightheaded, or if you take a huge dose, but if you're using it moderately in small amounts, not likely. So anytime you talk about these issues, there will be people who say, well, that's just a justification, and if it is, so be. What we have to do is have the strength to know ourselves well enough. And like I said, go back to the mental, physical, emotional, social, I was going to say emotional in there, but it goes in with mental, in my opinion. So a lot of different reasons why we might want to quit something if it's harmful. But if it's not, we have to ask ourselves why. If you smoke a little bit of cannabis in the evening or have a drink and you're fine with it, so be it. If you're afraid to do that because others are telling you that you're an addict, well, you're letting other people define your parameters. And one of the things we do have to do if we quit something is make new hobbies, have new things to do, if it's something that filled our time. But most of us aren't taking kratom to run and escape to the hills. One other aspect about quitting a substance to remember is that there's not only the placebo effect of taking medication, taking a sugar pill and thinking it works and having it work because your mind makes it work, but there's the nocebo effect. And your mind can also cause you to think that you're sick. You can cause yourself sickness, and we know this. We've seen it. So if you're going to quit a substance, have the positive outlook that it's a good thing instead of dreading it or fearing it. Sometimes our addictions do get too far, and then sometimes they just fade on their own. Other times people need help, and I totally understand that too. But I think self-control is really the key, and knowing ourselves. And not everybody has that capacity, I understand that too. And sometimes we are deluding ourselves. But I figure sharing my story of my use, which started when I was young, a teenager, I can only go by my own experiences, and I'm fortunate that I never went too far down any one particular road, and I was able to see the damage that was done to other people that I knew by some of these substances, but namely it's the big few that really did it, which is heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, and alcohol, and especially the combination of some of those is just horrific. It does a lot of body damage, and a lot of brain damage, as far as maybe not literally all the time, but it breaks down your psyche. It causes you to really to stop seeking anything in life. You're just constantly rewarded, and I think that's it's important that we separate those refined drugs like heroin, cocaine, from natural plants like cannabis and kratom, and so to each his own, and hopefully the people have the strength to know that society's image of what an addiction isn't even well understood. That even the experts have been thinking that punishment is the key. I'll tell you one more study that they did, a lot of people revert back to. Talk about the addictive potential of even cocaine. I think it was back in the 60s or 70s, they did the rat maze test where they took rats and put them in these areas where they had the choice between cocaine or water or whatever, and they ended up taking the cocaine instead of the food, I guess it was, until they eventually killed themselves. Somebody decided to repeat this test in recent decades and decided they made a rat utopia, mouse utopia, and this time none of the animals chose the cocaine. And they all chose food because they had companionship. And so the theory was that the reason why humans, when you pull humans away from their families and throw them in a treatment center and throw away the key and punish them for what they've done or throw them in prison, then you may be able to force them to quit for a while. But if it doesn't come on their own, it won't be a true achievement, and more likely it will affect them adversely because they don't have the connections and companionship which can help them overcome these things. that we're finding that the reason why people become addicted and start using heavily on things instead of just using them recreationally is often because they're missing that component in their life. And it either numbs them emotionally or allows them to have an emotional bond with the substance. And that's when it gets dangerous. So I guess my point is to be aware of yourself, be aware of your own compulsions and addictions, but realize that if it's social pressure that's causing you to want to stop doing something, you know, I have to question myself. Kratom hasn't affected me adversely at all. And so my plan to reduce my intake and taper off is merely to partially show others that as long as you approach something correctly, you know, at least most of the time, you know, if you don't just quit cold turkey and go down that road, then you'll be fine. And I think I can only speak for myself. I don't want to sound arrogant there, but, you know, that's, I think that what it comes down to is it can work for others that way. If you have the mindset and the strength, that mental alchemy, which allows us to be stronger than the world that's imposing its will upon us. Talk to y'all later. Be safe. Be smart. Don't take anything I say as dead serious. You know, if you do have an addiction or a problem with drugs that's causing you grief and pain in your life, I urge you to definitely seek help. But be aware that, you know, the treatment system, you know, spending $50,000 on a weekend getaway is really just a change of scenery. And a lot of people have been able to get the same achievement by a weekend away in the woods or a week, you know, in another country to just kind of escape our current dilemma. We get stuck in routines, and I think most of us realize that. And that's when we start just taking things on compulsion just because we do it every day and we're used to it. I'm sure a lot of kratom users out there have had days where they realized that they just didn't take their kratom. Oh wow, I didn't realize I didn't take my kratom. That's pretty amazing, because you would never find a heroin junkie who just forgot to shoot up, or a cocaine addict who forgot their cocaine. So it shows me that there is something different going on there, and that it's more of a habit sometimes than an actual addiction or compulsion. So be well, everybody. Talk to you soon, and happy holidays, everybody. Take care.